Welcome everyone to the panel discussion on challenging the criminalization of poverty and marginalization in Africa and beyond. My name is Doreen Namialo-Chaze. I'm the Regional Director, Penal Reform International, and I'll be the moderator for this session. I think we have all our panelists here. You're almost welcome. We'll have a maximum of 7 minutes for each speaker for the session. The session is co-hosted by Penal Reform International, the Government of Ghana, the Regional Campaign to Decriminalize Petty Offences in Africa, the African Policing Civil Oversight Forum, and the International Drug Policy Consortium. I want to welcome our wonderful panelists lined up today who will present current initiatives on the decriminalization of drug use and possession for personal use in Africa and their connection to the broader efforts on the decriminalization of petty offences and to realize the justice for the poor and marginalized populations in Africa. While this initiative is African-led, we believe that the recommendations that will be drawn from the discussion today will inform policymakers at both UN and national level and other civil society across the world. As we've had a few technical challenges, but we hope we can limit our discussion within the 50 minutes allocated to us. Before we can get started, I would like to share with the participants here a few housekeeping notes. You can listen to today's discussion in English, French, and Portuguese. So please select a language that you're comfortable with in the interpretation box, I think, which has been shared with everyone. Questions can be put in the chat box, and we will be able to present them to our panelists at the end of their presentations. Our panelists today are His Excellency, the Ambassador Philbert Johnson, the Permanent Representative of Ghana to the UN in Vienna, who will provide some opening remarks. We also have Honorable Teresa Manuela, Commissioner on Prisons, Conditions of Detention and Policing in Africa. Honorable Manuela will present the work of the African Commission on decriminalization of petty offences and the rationale behind it. We also have Happy Assan from the Tanzania Network of People Who Use Drugs, who will be explaining the experience of criminalization and people who use drugs with a focus on how it impacts disproportionately people who are marginalized. The other speaker is Ms. Maria Goretti-Logio from the International Drug Policy Consortium, and she will be addressing a topic. She will be presenting the new research on torture and enforcement of drug laws, as well as advocacy guide and an e-course on decriminalization. And our final panelist is Ms. Janelle Magwanda from the African Criminal Justice Reform, and she will present the work of the Regional Campaign to Decriminalize Petty Offences in Africa and to provide key recommendations for policymakers, including at UN level. Thank you all. I would like now to welcome our first speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Philbert Johnson, to give the opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor. I'm happy to take part in this important conversation on how we can create drug policies that support people who use drugs instead of punishing them. Let me start by thanking Penal Reform International, the International Drug Policy Consortium, the African Policing Civilian Oversight Forum, and the regional campaign against the criminalization of poverty and status for organizing this important side event. I hope during this side event, we can discuss the impact of criminalization on the lives of people who use drugs and reflect on some of the initiatives that are emerging across Africa, including Ghana, to adopt an evidence and human rights-based approach to drug use. The criminalization of drug use is a major driver of policing and incarceration across the world. According to UN data, more than 1.5 million people were arrested for drug use or possession for personal use in 2018, and over 450,000 people were in prison for the same reason. At the moment, we have no data on the number of people arrested or incarcerated for drug offenses in Africa. However, UNODC estimates that by 2030, the number of people who use drugs on our continent would rise by 40% to 86 million, or 8.4% of the population aged between 15 and 64 years old. This would be simply due to the natural growth of the population. Therefore, the need to understand the consequences of criminalizing people who use drugs in Africa is more important and urgent. To address these issues, our countries would do well to consider the recommendations that many human rights organizations have made in recent years. For instance, the UN Special Rapporteur on Health and the UN Committee on Economic and Social Rights have both highlighted that people would often shun away from critical health and harm reduction services out of fear of punishment or shaming when small possession of drugs and its use are criminalized. A year ago, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention released a new report, making clear that detaining or imprisoning someone simply because they use drugs can constitute arbitrary detention, and stressing that drug use and drug dependence must be approached from a health perspective. Important international standards, such as UN Common Position on Drugs or the International Guidelines on Human Rights and Drug Policy, also encourage us to adopt policies that decriminalize and provide support to people who use drugs. We need to recognize that when we criminalize activities such as drug possession for personal use, the enforcement of this law impacts disproportionately on people who are struggling the most in our society, people who are living in poverty or who are marginalized for any other status. This is something that Commissioner Manuel from the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, who is a member of this panel, has stressed in the past. In practice, the criminalization of drug possession can result in the criminalization of poverty and marginalization. Against this background, many countries have moved to reform their laws and policies to ensure that people who use drugs are supported rather than punished. My own country provides an excellent example of this. In May 2020, Ghana adopted a new Narcotic Control Commission Act that seeks, among other things, to treat drug use and dependence as a public health issue rather than focusing on law enforcement, incarceration, punishment, and repression. In this example, the new law has converted the previous prison terms from drug possession for personal use into fines of between 200 to 500 penalty units, translating to between $340 US dollars to $380 US dollars. This means that instead of sending people to prison for a minimum of 5 years for possession of drugs for personal use, as was the case under the old law, Ghana would now offer alternatives to incarceration and criminalization. Adopting the law is just a start, but it is a promising start. Now we need to make sure that it is well known and implemented by our law enforcement agencies and backed by sufficient health, harm reduction, and support services. As we would explore today, Ghana is just one amongst dozens of countries that have moved to decriminalize or depenalize people who use drugs. In Africa itself, we are witnessing a strong momentum for many countries that want to join Ghana to reform drug laws, including South Africa, Mauritius, and Liberia. A very important voice that we need to listen to in these processes is that of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. For instance, in a 2017 report on HIV and AIDS, the Commission noted that a human rights-based approach to drug use requires a move away from criminalization towards harm reduction and support. The 2017 Principles for the Decriminalization of Petty Offences also identify people who use drugs as one of the population most impacted by criminalization. Lastly, in her November 2021 intersectional report, Commissioner Manuela recommended that states work towards initiating legislative reviews that would allow the decriminalization of petty offenses, which typically amount to criminalizing poverty, including that of soft drug use. I'm very happy that we have created a space during the 56th session of the UNODC to discuss these emerging initiatives for a more just and humane approach to drug policies that provide support rather than punishment for people who use drugs. While the discussion will be centered on Africa, I am certain that the lessons are applicable well beyond our continent. I look forward to this discussion, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for the presentation. Ghana has set a good standard for us and is an example that many of the countries in Africa would replicate going forward, the good examples and best practices, particularly regarding harm reduction and how to manage use of drugs and possession on the continent. I would now like to invite our next speaker, Honorable Teresa Manuela, to make her presentation. Thank you.
Muito obrigada. Bom dia, boa tarde. Penso que desse lado já é tarde. Meu compasso de espera para que possam ajustar a língua e possamos então entender-nos. Posso continuar?
Yes, we
Muito
can
bem,
hear you. Yes.
muito bem, muito obrigada. Então, devo cumprimentar a todos os presentes. Devo agradecer o convite que foi feito para que a Comissão Africana, mais concretamente o mecanismo que eu presido, esteja presente neste evento paralelo, para podermos falar sobre as experiências, ou a pouca experiência que a Comissão tem sobre as questões relacionadas com a criminalização da pobreza, mais concretamente. Agradecer as palavras amáveis do Sr. Embaixador Philbert e dizer que vamos tentar, dentro do nosso possível e do tempo que nos está reservado, que são 7 minutos, encontrar algum tempo para podermos partilhar algumas coisas. Como não sei falar sem olhar para o papel, vão me desculpar, vou tentar aqui partilhar o ecrã para podermos então falar sobre estão a ver o meu ecrã, vou colocá-lo em ponto grande para permitir que possamos então conversar a respeito. De forma muito rápida, tenho algumas coisinhas para partilhar. É pena ser tudo em português, mas vamos tentar que os intérpretes nos ajudem. Portanto, eu vou pôr a pirâmide ao contrário e vou começar pelo problema. O nosso problema é a superlotação das cadeias. Isto é uma consequência social da criminalização de pequenos delitos, entre eles o uso da droga. Depois passo rapidamente pelos princípios e a experiência que temos e, no final, desafios e conclusão. Espero ser rápida. Portanto, nós temos este mandato por parte da União Africana e a Comissão usou este mandato de forma extensa. No mecanismo que eu dirijo, usou para criar, então, os princípios, entre outras coisas, porque é sobre os princípios que hoje vamos falar, sobre a descriminalização dos pequenos delitos e, então, a violação dos artigos 2º, 3º, 5º e 6º da Carta Africana, e não só. Eu trago aqui uma repetição dos artigos, mas ponho um acento tônico no artigo 6º, mais concretamente nas questões ligadas à liberdade e à segurança. Portanto, o direito que as pessoas têm de não serem privados de liberdade por parte das autoridades, exceto por razões legais e com observância dos procedimentos legais, usando os critérios da necessidade e da proporcionalidade, e a segurança, que é uma pessoa tem o direito de viver de forma segura e tranquila e sem ameaças. Devo dizer que há 25 anos que foi criado o mecanismo e isto foi resultado de reflexões feitas e as mais importantes foram na Conferência de Kampala, que ocorreu em 1996, onde foram referenciadas as condições sobre prisões em África. E dele saíram importantes decisões. Direitos dos prisioneiros. Por quê? Porque os prisioneiros devem manter todos os seus direitos, exceto aqueles que lhes são privados por alguma razão. Portanto, vamos pela parte da exclusão de partes. Trago uma série de questões que esta grande conferência levantou. Dizia que crimes de menor potencial ofensivo nunca deviam ser levados para as cadeias, porque devia haver outras formas para tratar. Também dizia que tinha que se adaptar os modelos bem-sucedidos dos serviços prisionais. Tinha que resolver a questão de instruir a sociedade sobre a necessidade das alternativas de prisão e, por último, que a Comissão deveria indicar um relator, trabalhar com os Estados e cooperar com as organizações da sociedade civil. Seguiram-se-lhe a Declaração de Kadoma, de 1997, de Arusha, de 1999, e, por último, o Plano de Ação, a Declaração e Plano de Ação de Ouagadougou. Foi com base nestes princípios e não só que desses instrumentos que surgiram vários instrumentos, entre eles as diretrizes de Luanda e os princípios sobre a descriminalização de pequenos delitos. Por quê? Porque são estes pequenos delitos que superpovoam as cadeias. Mas então quais são as razões? Como eu disse, virei a pirâmide. Na preparação do estudo, nós e os parceiros encontramos várias destas coisas. E entre eles percebimos que as pessoas eram detidas por não exercerem uma atividade, por serem ociosas, por exercerem atividade de subsistência em locais públicos. Por vezes, pelo seu aspecto físico, ele tem aspecto de ser um gatuno, um marginal. Por incumprimento de obrigações, várias outras questões foram identificadas, e inclusive o uso de substâncias psicotrópicas. Também esta foi uma das situações identificadas. E todas estas situações, infelizmente, afetam pessoas que têm poucas posses. Então isto estava na base de leis muito antigas e herdadas do colonialismo, leis muito amplas e que davam grandes possibilidades à força pública para poder prender pessoas. E essas pessoas, quando encarceradas, não conseguem assistência judiciária, não conseguem pagar multas e também é um grande custo, um grande peso para a própria família. E isto mesmo também constou da opinião conclusiva do Tribunal Africano, que foi solicitado agora em 2020. Então, ela sintetizou em 3 situações: redução de pessoas marginalizadas para evitar pessoas indesejáveis na rua, redução aparente dos custos do que incorrem ou incorreriam ao tratar dos pobres na sua municipalidade, e também de prevenir crimes contra a propriedade. Falta-me 1 minuto, vamos embora. Então, nós estamos a falar das consequências e das causas da criminalização. O que é que a Comissão fez? A Comissão, com os seus parceiros, adotou os princípios em 2017 e começou a popularização em 2018. Há seminários que temos feito ciclicamente, há notas de chamadas de atenção aos Estados, há vários formatos de divulgação dos princípios. Incluímos informações nos nossos boletins, envolvemos a sociedade civil para poder fornecer material para melhor monitorizar as questões relacionadas com a criminalização da pobreza. Nos últimos 2 anos, não houve seminários, mas os parceiros continuaram a trabalhar. Quais são os desafios, meus senhores? Apesar do trabalho feito, esta mudança está sendo lenta, mas posso garantir que desde o caso do vendedor ambulante Maeso Gwanda, nunca mais a África voltará a ficar calada face à criminalização da pobreza. Então, esta última oportunidade que é dada por esta legislação branda para permitir aos Estados adaptar a sua legislação interna e para torná-la modelo. Devo dizer que estamos a sugerir, como disse bem o senhor embaixador, alterações na lei penal. Está lento, é normal, mas há países que ainda mantêm fortes indícios de criminalização ou marginalização das pessoas. As leis continuam a penalizar usuários de drogas leves, que todos percebemos que são vítimas de redes de tráfico, e estão a penalizar pessoas que não possuem meios visíveis de sobrevivência. Entretanto, outros países estão a criar ou atualizar novas condutas criminosas. Se olharmos para Nairobi, o Condado de Nairobi publicou uma lei a 20 de agosto de 2021 que, entre outras coisas, criminaliza a venda pública nas ruas. E isto só é feito por pessoas que têm poucas posses. Mas há países que estão a atualizar os seus códigos penais e revogaram algumas dessas leis que criminalizam atos e omissões qualificadas como vadiagem. Temos exemplos de Angola, Cabo Verde, Quênia, Lesoto, Moçambique, Ruanda, Zimbábue. Há países em que também a legislação penal está em curso e a Comissão Africana está atenta para permitir intervir quando for necessário para que os pequenos delitos sejam descriminalizados. Mais 1 minuto, por favor, e então a conclusão é: os desafios são maiores que as nossas realizações, mas a nossa determinação para trabalhar é maior. A nossa cooperação com a sociedade civil vai se manter inabalável, porque só ela vai permitir a monitoria. São várias as questões que levaram à criminalização e marginalização da pobreza Mas o caminho a seguir também não é reto. Então estamos a sugerir aos Estados, como disse bem o embaixador Philbert, que as leis incriminadoras sejam mais claras e concisas e que se concentrem em infrações com um potencial ofensivo que põe em risco a sociedade. As infrações menores devem ser mesmo tratadas como infrações menores e serem usadas penas alternativas para pedir descongestionar as cadeias e não duplamente penalizar a população que está já penalizada pela pobreza. Também que sejam reformadas as políticas e, consequentemente, as leis para usuários de drogas. Vamos olhar para eles como vítimas e não como agentes criminais. Que a detenção seja efetivamente um último recurso, como previsto na política criminal geral. Que os Estados vejam a questão das causas da pobreza, que levam as pessoas às cadeias e não cuidem das consequências. Mas a Comissão vai continuar a trabalhar com os poderes legislativos e com o poder judiciário para estas abordagens sobre descriminalização de pequenos delitos e, consequentemente, a descriminalização e marginalização da pobreza no continente. Muito obrigada e, como sempre digo, a Comissão Africana é uma nossa responsabilidade coletiva. Espero que tenha contribuído de alguma forma para este nosso trabalho e que, no final, se pouca coisa, houver mais perguntas a fazer, então estarei aqui para poder respondê-las. Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Honorable Teresa Manuela, for that presentation. We thank the Commission for your support towards the campaign to decriminalize petty offences in Africa. You've given us good leadership towards this campaign, and we hope that we will continue to get support from the Commission as we progress towards the repealing and updating of penal laws in countries where petty offences continue to be criminalized and targeting the poor. Again, I would like to encourage everyone with questions to please use our Q&A section on your screens. In case you have questions for the panelists, we will run through them and present them at the end of the presentations. Thank you. I would now like to welcome Happy Assan from the Tanzania network of people who use drugs to make her presentation. Happy, you're most welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good evening to everyone. And I'm sorry that I'm in this situation, but at least I believe you can hear me. Yes, that's what counts the most. I'm so grateful to get this opportunity to share and to share what's going on within my community and what's going on actually around the world of people who use and inject drugs. I'm the director, my name is Happy Assan, and I'm the director of the network known as TANPUD, Tanzania Network of People Who Use Drugs. Actually, I have 4 main points, and that's like the prisons and things like always when I get an opportunity to pass by the prison, like kind of I read on the big like banner, you know, right on the door, like it actually reads like it's a center to teach people some things like that, those that they can help them in their lives. But actually, in real sense, that's not what's happening. I've seen most of my community members and others who get to enter and get out of those places. When they enter, they're in a really different area, and when they come out, they're in a different situation. It's kind of 2 different worlds. There's a lot of diseases in there: hepatitis, HIV, TB, skin diseases, STIs. There's a lot of acts that are happening. Someone can enter there with one problem, being a drug user, caught with 1 pinch or 2 pinches, small amount for his or her own use. But when he gets in the prison and then come out, get the opportunity to come out alive and healthier, it's kind of, he has additional issues. He becomes the master. He learns more and more rather than get to be changed his or her behavior to be better. The second thing is criminalization. We aren't criminals. We are people who have a certain issue or problem that just needs a helping hand, someone to pull you over. I believe and I know each and every one of us who are here in this meeting hasn't made it all alone. In one or two areas, once in a lifetime, we all needed a hand to pull us through so that we can make it, right? And this is what we need, you know, kind of look on a person who uses drugs. The world changes. I've been there, I know it, I live it, you know. It's kind of, when you enter your 18 years and when you're trying to recover, you're kind of 30 years, 35, but your mindset remains on that 18, because at the time of those 12, 15 years, it's kind you were in a world that is, you know, being in a box. Yeah, because you just know one thing, find money, get the drugs. So your routine is all the same always. So you can see, and then you call us criminals, criminalizing us. You find me sitting there and just smoking my pipe and you grab me, throw me in jail with beatings and wherever. This is so tough for us. We need the world's support, leaders, think about us, police. We are no criminals, we're humans who need help. Like harm reduction package, this is my third point. Harm reduction really helps. Like the commissioner who first talked, he explained it better, you know? It's kind of the amount used in harm reduction is very less than the amount being used to sue someone, to take care of that, to punish that person, rather than if you could have just turned it around and say, let me help this person, take him to a harm reduction center, put him in recreational center where he can learn, she can learn, get help for herself, her kids, you know. There are no good maternal services, or some countries grab your child and put them somewhere else. You remain there like a helpless, hopeless somebody. Your kids can make you change when you see them there, like, mommy, I want this. You feel the pain, but grabbing my baby and throwing them somewhere doesn't help. The first thing is we are shaded in a world of diseases. You know, we need to get treatment, support, methadone, buprenorphine, sober, whatever the choice of that person. Let's implement there. You know, I agree, data is something. We start on data to know that there's this amount of people who needs a certain support. But how many years we've stuck on one area of data? Let's add something else within the data. Harm reduction services, capture data, put recreational center, and support us on our changes, you know, rather than targeting us and calling us criminals and sue us within prisons. So this is all that I'm kind of asking everyone, the leaders, the lawmakers, decision makers, and everyone who can help us change.
Happy, we lost you. Hello, Happy? We lost Happy as she was sharing of people who are using drugs and those found in possession. And let's see whether she'll come back shortly. She was expressing the concern of the imprisonment of people who use drugs, and according to many experiences, most of the people enter prisons as minor offenders and come back as hardcore criminals, and also that the people who use drugs are better placed in harm reduction programs than programs that than imprisonment. And also, I think it's important for us to think through, and as we advance the campaign to decriminalize petty offences, on the cost of imprisonment, which is higher harm reduction. As we wait for Happy, I don't know if she'll come back. There are a few questions, which I'll only share one question, and if you then come back, we'll proceed to our next presenter. Our first question was on, I think this is for Honorable Manuela, and it's the question is, when will the African public policies integrate the fact that many plant-based drugs, including coffee, cannabis, iboga, are traditional, which are traditional heritage of the African continent and the African peoples, and that it is a risk of uncriminalized foreign capture, for example, biopiracy. The second question is from Sohela, and she asks, well, could you please elaborate on the link between drug use and poverty? Honorable Manuela, maybe you could address those two questions. Thank you.
Muito obrigada. Obrigada, espero ter percebido bem as perguntas que foram colocadas. A primeira pergunta me parece estar referenciada com políticas africanas para que possam reconhecer o uso da cannabis ou a cannabis como um patrimônio africano, provavelmente tal como é feito na Jamaica e outros países. A esta pergunta eu devo dizer que isto são matérias legislativas e que estão no portfólio dos Estados. Há Estados que são mais flexíveis em relação a outros no que diz respeito ao uso da droga. E a droga, por aquilo que nós sabemos, e aliás o IDP sabe disso, que há drogas leves e há drogas pesadas. E a cannabis, ela é colocada dentro daquilo que é chamado drogas leves, até porque a própria bebida alcoólica também é um tipo de droga. O uso desenfreado do cigarro é outra droga leve. Então, em relação à cannabis, é efetivamente uma questão que pode e deve ser estudada, porque, por exemplo, no meu país, Angola, há regiões onde os mais velhos usam a cannabis como um incentivo para trabalharem. Um incentivo, por exemplo, os pescadores, quando vão para o mar, levam cannabis para poder se incentivar uns aos outros e poderem aguentar as agruras do mar e poderem pescar. O camponês também, quando vai, em princípio leva, que é para poder auto-estimular-se e poder trabalhar. Mas as políticas legais ou a lei formal entende isto como sendo um crime. E eu lembro-me, vou partilhar com vocês um caso no meu país em que, enquanto eu trabalhava num processo, um indivíduo foi detido, um pescador, porque estava a usar cannabis. E ele perguntou, mas isto é crime desde quando, se eu o faço desde a minha infância e nunca me fez mal nenhum? Então nós olhamos-nos e perguntamos o que é que podemos fazer a um costume tão antigo e centenário nesta comunidade, aparecermos nós hoje a dizer que é crime. Hoje raramente se pune o uso da cannabis no meu país. Punimos é o tráfico, é a venda, é a plantação. Mas mesmo assim já há políticas mais flexíveis. A África tem que olhar para os seus usos e costumes bons, desde que o uso da cannabis não influencie mais condutas, poder ser então legalizado nos nossos países, nos nossos 55 países, ou ali onde ela tem maior uso, e a partir dali poder elevá-la à qualidade de patrimônio de África. Isto é um assunto para nós discutirmos, continuarmos a discutir e então podermos trazer sugestões para que a Comissão e os parceiros e os Estados possamos sentar à mesma mesa para podermos ver isto. A segunda pergunta, que estou a levar muito tempo, é relacionada com a ligação que pode ser feita entre a pobreza e o uso de droga leve. A ligação que eu faço é que, normalmente, quando, e eu falo no geral, quando um jovem, uma pessoa, opta pela droga, tal como disse a senhora que me antecedeu, que eu não anotei o nome, que é a senhora Happy, é porque encontrou algum problema para resolver, não conseguiu e começou por usar de forma leve, tentando encontrar alegria, tentando encontrar solução para a sua frustração. Só no final é que vai fazer com que isto altere a vida dela e faça que fique dependente. Mas então, como é que isto funciona? Qual é a ligação? A ligação é que também a sociedade discrimina já por si o usuário de droga e fica sem apoios. Na minha apresentação eu dizia que uma das consequências é que estas pessoas não têm apoios, não têm meios para se poder defender no tribunal, porque se tiver meios, vai se defender no tribunal e vai dizer que a quantidade de droga com que foi encontrada não é suficiente para ser criminalizado. E eu concordo com a senhora quando diz que o usuário de droga não deve ser tratado como criminoso, mas sim como uma pessoa que necessita de ajuda e que, ao invés de prisão, devemos colocá-los em locais onde eles possam se reencontrar. Até porque hoje a Europa tem locais específicos onde as pessoas podem usar a sua droga e depois continuar a sua vida. A ligação é exatamente quando são presos nas malhas da justiça, é ali onde surge a vulnerabilidade deles. Obrigada.
Thank you, Honorable Manuela, for that response. We don't have much time now. I would like to request our participants to kindly stay online as we listen to our two more presenters who will be speaking next. Without wasting more time, I want to invite Maria Goretti-Loglo to present the new research on torture and enforcement of drug laws. Maria?
Thank you very much, Doreen. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining this session from. I'll try to be very snappy with the presentation so that we don't take much time. So basically, my presentation is a research report on torture and ill treatment on drugs policy that was conducted in Nigeria. So basically, I don't know, Adria, can you project the slides for us? Yeah, so basically, the rationale behind the study was is that in November 2021, 2021, Nigeria was up for its first ever periodic review at the UN Committee Against Torture. So this study sought to explore ways in which the enforcement of drug policy can drive abusers, which we all know has been happening in many of our countries. So basically, the objective was to understand the physical and mental environment of people who use drugs and law enforcement agents, as well as custodial facilities where people who use drugs are detained to receive treatment. We also sought to try to identify if there were any abuses in such facilities where people were kept for treatment in terms of rehabilitation and or were detained in certain centers. Now, the study was done by AfriLaw in collaboration with IDPC with some support from the Robert Carr Foundation. So the studies area covered 5 major states. As you can see from the presentation, the slides. I don't know if Aditra has already done that. Okay, yeah. So we have about 5 states that we conducted the study from: Abia State, Abuja, Ekwabum, Enugu, and Kaduna. And a total of the total number of the population for the study was basically about 79 persons, including 59 men, who made up about 74% of the sample size, and 20 women, making 26% of the sample size. Next slide, please. Now, so basically from that study, what we found out was that about 72 of the 79, out of the 79 that was interviewed, experienced or knew of cases in which people who use drugs have been subjected to some kind of physical or mental or sexual violence in the hands of law enforcement. Out of that number, 56 respondents referred to some of the forms of physical violence that were meted out to them, which included beating, physical violence, starvation of food, especially in instances where they were detained in centers or rehabilitation centers. About 29 respondents also had experience, or had some experience or knew of people who had experienced some form of mental violence in terms of humiliation, harassment, verbal abuses, and all that. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of law enforcement, we tried to ask questions to know what was the purpose of the violence, the violence against people who use drugs. And some of the responses were that there were means and ways of punishing them. Also, some of them experienced extortions where people, law enforcement agencies extort monies from them. And I believe that many of us are not new, especially we those who work on the ground. We know some of these things happen most of the time, because sometimes we have had instances where law enforcement extract bribes for personal gains. Also, some of them also experience these violations as a result of law enforcement agencies trying to extort or get information or gather information from these people. So either you are beaten, you are harassed, or you are made to you are made to undergo some form of violence. Some violence is meted out to you. Now, in terms of this survey, what we also found out was that about 90% of the people who survived or witnessed law enforcement violations indicated that they had some form of physical, mental, or sexual abuses. And this is not too new, because we've seen a number of studies across the region where these things have been reported. One of such studies was what Youth Rise Nigeria did in their report titled "We Are People." So this is just a collaboration of some of the things we already know on the ground regarding how people who use drugs are treated by law enforcement in our communities. Next slide, please. What we also found out was that about 13 respondents also referred to cases of physical or mental violence in government-run centers. For instance, in the study, there were about 9 of the NDLA facilities where there were reports of violations of these people's rights, either in the form of physical, mental, or sexual abuses. About 14 respondents also indicated that in some religious rehabilitation centers, they were subjected to some kind of beatings or deliberate starvation, not giving food, or they are humiliated or made to undertake some hard labor, as mentioned by some respondents. Next slide, please. Out of the 71 respondents that reported cases of physical, mental, and sexual violence at the hands of law enforcement, about 17 that survived such violence were able to report the situation to someone else, either as to an NGO or a relative and all that. However, there were some who could not report. As you already know, there are people who use drugs. When they undergo these kind of things, people feel that they deserve those kind of treatment that is given to them. And so many of the people who reported this violence were unable to formally put in complaints, even though we had a respondent who indicated that he did make a formal complaint. Just to add to the fact that there were even instances in the report of Youth Rise where a young woman gave an account of what she went through in the hands of these law enforcement agencies, where she was sexually violated. Just the fact that she is in possession of some 2 or 3 rolls of cannabis. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of all, with the cases and the violence of abuse, what we noticed was that many of these things were disproportionately inflicted on people who were already marginalized. And it was basically on the basis of one's gender, sexual orientation, or one's economic status. Instances where people came from good homes and well-to-do homes, many of them did not suffer some of these things. However, people who were poor, people who had a certain economic status, people of straw, were those who were mainly subjected to many of these abuses. What we also found out was that women also experience specific forms of torture and ill treatment, and mostly this comes in the form of sexual abusers. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the recommendations from this study, what we have sought to encourage in terms of going forward is that we need to have our states establish a robust mechanism to oversee the actions of law enforcement agencies, because many a times you see these abuses happening, and even when these users go forward to complain, the reaction from these agencies is a bit appalling, and it discourages a lot of these people from going forward to report these cases. What we also need to do is that we have to ensure that at least there are states must also take immediate action to reverse dehumanization and marginalization of people who use. How can we do this? Many of these abuses are as a result of the war on drugs, the supposed war on drugs that we have. And so we need to ensure that we decriminalize drug use and possession for personal use. And by doing so, it will help people who use drugs to be able to be given that dignifying support and be given that support that they need, the necessary support they need to be able to overcome the challenges they face daily. We also need to establish evidence-based and right-based treatment centers like harm reduction. Like Happy rightly said, there's no point sending people. We've seen the evidence already. People who have gone to prison and come back, hardened criminals. He went in or she went in because of one rule of cannabis or marijuana. And yet by the time he's out, he would have learned a number of criminal activities, maybe robbery and other things that will harden him and make the situation worse. So we need to take serious look at that as countries. We also have to make sure that we take an action to remove the stigma and discrimination experienced by these people. Institutions that have been put in place to oversee these things must be up and doing in terms of that. The fact that somebody is a drug user doesn't mean that the person loses his or her human rights. They are human beings like us. They deserve the rights and all that every human being is entitled to. Next. Thank you very much. I would like to end here, and then once questions come, we will take them up.
Thank you very much, Maria, for sharing with us the evidence from the field on the experiences of the people who use drugs before the law enforcers and within the criminal justice system. I would now like to invite our last presenter, Ms. Janelle Magwanda, yes, to make her presentation. Janelle?
Thank you very much, Program Coordinator, and to all our distinguished guests. Good afternoon from sunny Cape Town, South Africa. My name is Janelle Mangwanda, and I am a researcher at the Africa Criminal Justice Reform Project, which is in the Dalla Omar Institute within the University of the Western Cape. However, this afternoon, my presentation will be made on behalf of the Regional Campaign for the Decriminalization of Poverty and Status. So I will remain a bit brief for the sake of time. However, my presentation will have a four-part take. Initially, I'll just speak about the context of the campaign, highlighting what the problem is, how it can be fixed, and what we can do to fix the problem. So to go a little bit back, in a couple of years ago, an audit was done on a number of African countries, which showed that a significant number of people who were mostly poor and from marginalized environments were detained in remand facilities for extensive periods of time for very minor and petty offenses. A research report that was done in 2015 confirmed this, and it was found that while these arrests were often illegal, discriminatory, and that they criminalized the poor and the marginalized. And we also found that these offenses do not promote public safety, and penalties are quite disproportionate to the crime that is allegedly committed. The reports also found that pretrial detention and prison overcrowding are major challenges in Africa, which I believe we are all well versed about. Moreover, the role of police or law enforcement in carrying out these arrests often take place without warrants, and it encourages police corruption and bribery, as has been alluded to by my previous colleagues. So what then is the problem? We've noted that criminal justice systems criminalize the poor and the marginalized by using very archaic, overly broad, outdated, and discriminatory laws, which are used, as I've been saying, to get rid of those that we considered unwanted or undesirable, or people who do not belong. And if, to this effect, some of the offenses, such as being a rogue, a vagabond, a nuisance, has been used in order to criminalize those who are poor or from marginalized communities. And we found that this is not necessarily the best way to deal with the problem, as we've discovered in our discussion this afternoon, especially if the behavior does not threaten public safety. So how can this be fixed? And this is where the regional campaign came in. In 2014, 7 like-minded organizations came together with the purpose of seeing how we could decriminalize or declassify certain laws and statutes, how to promote research and advocacy, how to advocate for a regional normative framework, and to pursue the African Court for an advisory opinion. I will speak to that in the next couple of slides. But the campaign also sought to expand membership to all regions on the African continent. To date, we have 36 member organizations spanning through all 4 regions of the continent, and it has also gained traction outside of the continent. You will see on this graphic in all the countries where the campaign is currently active. So what has the campaign done? There are 3 major milestones or achievements that the campaign has made since its inception. Firstly, with regards to research and advocacy, campaign members have produced a number of research reports to raise awareness of the problematic laws and nature of offenses within their domestic environments. And these research reports have highlighted arrests conducted by the police, and has also sought to provide constructive alternatives to arrest and detention. Secondly, the campaign has also been very, very crucial in terms of law reform, as campaign members have successfully obtained domestic as well as regional law reform as a result of our research and advocacy. The 2 that spring in mind is the work that was done in Malawi, where the Southern African Litigation Center and the Center for Human Rights Education, Advice and Assistance released a research finding on rogue and vagabond and idle and disorderly offenses. And this led to an expert consultation with the Justice Department, which produced directives for prosecutors on the prosecution of minor offenses. A similar occasion took place in Kenya, and the Director for Public Prosecutions issued practice directions on handling the offense of touting. We were speaking about the principles, which the Commissioner has also made mention to. In 2017, the African Commission adopted these principles, and a simplified version of the principle was launched during the 67th Ordinary Session of the ACHPR in November 2020. The link to the principles are attached in my slide, but I will make sure to add it in the chat room as well. So thirdly, the campaign has sought to, through strategic litigation, to challenge a number of petty offense laws. We've had cases in Zambia, in Malawi, in Uganda, in Zimbabwe. I heard the Commissioner mentioning the Gwanda case in Malawi, which was really a great success for the campaign overall. So when the campaign decided in 2019 to approach the African Court on an advisory opinion, this was on the basis of the compatibility of vagrancy-related laws and bylaws with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And in December 2020, the campaign obtained a favorable advisory opinion. And this opinion can be found on the link that I've just included. But it's important for us because it confirms the campaign's position that some vagrancy and other related petty laws which still form part of some African states are unlawful, arbitrary, discriminatory, and do perpetuate poverty and marginalization. So here comes 2019, 2020, and the whole world is hit with COVID-19. And what we found, particularly in the African context, is that a number of countries established states of emergency, states of disasters, some even established states of calamity, and ordered measures such as curfews and lockdowns to monitor the curve of the infections. But what we saw during this period was that public health restrictions created new laws, laws which previously were not there, and these laws criminalized and had a criminalizing effect and human rights violations, especially on the poor and the marginalized. We saw many instances of the brutal enforcement of curfew and lockdown measures, and it was really a question of lives versus livelihoods, because many who broke some of the COVID-19 restrictions may not have done that for the purpose of defying the laws, but rather for survival. And in September 2020, the campaign hosted an online conference, and the conference dealt with COVID-19 and the decriminalization of petty offenses. And the statement that came out of this conference that was held online was presented at the ordinary session of the ACHPR. And our main message was that containment measures should be necessary, proportional, reasonable, lawful, non-discriminatory, and time-bound. So that's how much the campaign has been working throughout the campaign. And in line with what has taken place over the last 2 or 3 years, ACJR, which is the organization that I am working in, then produced a study. It's a comparative study of measures taken in 5 African countries, and we wanted to focus on the criminal justice, human rights, and COVID-19 measures. So we looked at 5 countries: Kenya, Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, and Zambia. And our report seeks to describe the process by which each of these countries established states of emergencies or states of disasters, but also to see how they were declared with particular reference to stakeholder consultation with the judiciary, the legislature, civil society, the academic community, and the broader public. So we analyzed the legal frameworks of these 5 countries, and we wanted to identify what are some of the strengths and weaknesses that were used in design. So this research report also considered how each country responded to COVID-19, what were the litigation and responses, because in a number of these countries, civil society organizations responded to the government's measures. Some were successful and others not so successful, but it's important to note that when a pandemic of this nature takes place, to see civil society rising and challenging the government when it comes to measures which are too restrictive is quite an interesting thing to behold. The the report rather also focused on the impact on civil and political rights, as well as the impact on the detention, monitoring, and oversight mechanisms. I've included the link to our report, and I will also add that to the chat box. But in order to end, unfortunately, for the sake of time, I don't think I'll be able to play the infographic, also add that to our chat. But what can we do now? I've presented to you the milestones and the achievements that the campaign has reached. So what can we do? Firstly, we can join the campaign. It's important for us to share the information about the campaign, but also to urge institutions, not just here in Africa, but abroad and across the world as well, on how to promote the decriminalization of petty offences, in as much as we engage with other commissions and also following the campaign's progress online. I've included all the campaign's social media handles so that you can join in and also disseminate the information that the campaign is producing. So I was making mention to an infographic. It's a very recent infographic that was created by the campaign, and it simply highlights all the achievements that the campaign has made. This infographic is available in French, in English, as well as in Portuguese, and I believe in Arabic as well. I will add that to the chat room so that you are able to view it at your own leisure. With that, coordinator, I'll take a bow and say thank you very much.
Thank you, Janelle, for sharing the milestones of the campaign. A lot of work has been done clearly, and a lot is yet to be done. We invite anyone who is interested and to join the campaign. Francophone Africa is very much encouraged because a lot of work has been done in Anglophone Africa mainly, as well as the Portuguese Africa can also join the campaign. Because of time, I will not invite any more questions because actually we don't have any questions in the Q&A. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panel of speakers for the presentations that they have made today. I thank you all, our co-sponsors of today's event, the government of Ghana, the regional campaign to decriminalize petty offences in Africa, the African Policing Civil Oversight Forum, and the International Drug Policy, who have made today's event possible. Thank you very much for enabling us to come here, sharing experiences and lessons with everyone here. And to our interpreters who have done a great job. Thank you all. Thank you.